What if I told you that before the boy who lived ever set foot in Hogwarts, before the candles floated over the Great Hall, and before any golden snitch was caught, a lonely half-giant wandered its edge, keeper of keys, secrets, and creatures no one else dared to love? You're standing there now, at the break of dawn, where the mist rolls down from the forbidden forest, and the first light paints the castle in soft amber. You can almost smell the wet moss, the wood smoke drifting from that little hut by the lake, and the faint sweetness of treacle fudge that never quite cools. And yet, this world you've stepped into isn't the one you think you know. It's quieter, rougher, lonelier. The years before fame found its way into Hagrid's heart. You probably won't survive one night here without a crossbow or a bit of dragon hide between you and what crawls in the dark. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'm really curious, from which part of the world are you watching this video? Write your country in the comments. Let's see how far this little story has traveled. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through the mud toward Hagrid's hut, the old stones glistening like dragon scales after rain. His lantern swings from a hook outside, a low, steady light that seems to promise warmth, or at least company. He's humming something you can't quite place, half lullaby, half dirge. There's a curious rhythm to it, like a giant's heartbeat slowed by age. When he sees you, he gives that lopsided grin, the one that makes you feel as if you've been expected all along. You duck under the low doorway, careful not to trip over Fang, who is pretending to be asleep, but keeps one eye cracked open just in case you're holding food. Inside, it smells like earth and smoke, and something bubbling gently on the stove. Hagrid moves about his hut in that strange combination of grace and clumsiness, one moment balancing a kettle with a finger, the next knocking over a pile of books labeled Magical Beasts That Bite Back, and How to Pat Them Anyway. He tells you stories as the fire crackles, his voice deep enough to make the floorboards hum. There's one about his father, a wizard small enough to ride on a hippogriff's neck, and another about the mother he barely remembers, a giantess who disappeared beyond the mountains before he was tall enough to reach the door latch. History books gloss over these details, reducing him to a friendly oaf. But you can tell this man has lived through more than laughter and pies. There's something haunted in the pauses between his jokes. You ask him about the years after he was expelled from Hogwarts, but he just shrugs and stirs the stew, as if the answer might rise with the steam. Outside, thunder grumbles over the forbidden forest. You can feel the weight of centuries pressing against the glass, the kind of silence that only exists in places where magic has been buried, not lost. Hagrid notices your gaze and nods toward the window. "Aye," he mutters. "She's restless tonight." You're not sure if he means the storm or the forest. Probably both. There's a historical footnote somewhere about how the forbidden forest used to stretch all the way to the sea, a living barrier between the wizarding and the mundane. Scholars still argue whether the trees themselves were enchanted or merely old enough to remember enchantment. Either way, Hagrid walks those woods like they're old friends, and that friendship has its price. When you finally step outside, the rain has eased, and the castle lights flicker like distant constellations. Hagrid's shadow follows beside yours, massive, comforting, and a little melancholy. "Funny thing," he says softly, "you keep things for so long, they start keeping you." He pats your shoulder with a hand the size of a dinner plate, then turns back toward the hut, lantern swaying like a slow heartbeat against the dark. You realize, watching him fade into the mist, that this is just the beginning. The story everyone knows starts with a letter. His started with exile. And in between, well, that's where the unseen years wait. The morning after that quiet storm, you find Hagrid already outside, sleeves rolled up, boots sunk ankle-deep in mud, wrestling with a fence post that looks more like a tree trunk than anything meant to hold sheep. The air smells of wet pine and roasted coffee, and somewhere in the distance, A centaur snorts, a sound halfway between a sigh and thunder. You watch Hagrid pause for a moment, wiping his brow with a handkerchief that could easily double as a sailcloth. He catches you watching and chuckles. "Didn't think giants needed fences, did you?" he says. And there's that humor again, masking something older. Because truth be told, this isn't just about keeping creatures out, it's about keeping memories in. The half-giant blood in his veins isn't something he likes to talk about, and yet it's written all over him, in the stoop of his shoulders, in the way he flinches ever so slightly when someone calls him gentle. You walk with him toward the edge of the forest, the ground soft beneath your boots, the fog curling low like smoke from an invisible cauldron. He starts talking, not directly to you, more to the air, to himself, maybe to the ghosts of his past. "They said I was dangerous," he mutters. "Said my mum was a monster. But monsters don't tuck you in at night, do they?" His father, a wizard of modest skill and immense patience, had raised him alone after the giantess Fridwulfa left. Hagrid never saw her again, though sometimes he claims to hear her voice in the wind on the cliffs near Hogwarts. Historians still debate whether Fridwulfa was part of the northern tribes driven out by Aurors in the late 1800s or one of the so-called mountain clans that refused to swear allegiance to the ministry. Either way, she left behind a son who would always be too large for any world that claimed to be civilized. When Hagrid was expelled from Hogwarts, the reason was written down in neat, bureaucratic ink, possession of a dangerous creature. But the truth was far messier. He had loved that creature, a giant spider named Aragog. More than most people ever loved him. He still blames himself for what happened, though the old records tell another story, one that hints at political cover-ups and a whispering campaign against Dumbledore's protégés. "Dumbledore stood by me," Hagrid says softly, his voice almost breaking on the name. "Said I could stay on, help with the grounds. Keeper of keys, you know. Never asked for nothing back. It's a rare historical fact, buried in ministry files, that Albus Dumbledore personally rewrote sections of the Hogwarts Charter to allow Hagrid to remain, technically as a non-teaching staff member, but, in truth, as the soul of the school's wild heart." You stop by a patch of earth where the grass is burnt in strange patterns. Hagrid scratches his beard, pretending not to notice. "Old experiment," he grumbles. "Don't ask." You ask anyway, and he sighs. Turns out, a few years after his expulsion, he tried breeding a smaller strain of blast-ended scroots. "For companionship," he says defensively. "It didn't go well. They didn't fancy being small," he mutters, staring at the scorched ground. You laugh quietly, and he joins you, the sound echoing off the trees like thunder filtered through honey. A group of first-year students passes by on their way to herbology, waving shyly. One whispers, "Is it true he used to be a student?" Hagrid waves back, a little embarrassed. "Aye," he calls, "back when trolls marked our exams." The children giggle and hurry off. When they're gone, he leans on his spade and says, almost to himself, "Funny how folks forget, eh? Once you're big enough, they stop seeing who you were and start seeing what you could break." It's one of those rare sentences that sits heavy in your chest long after he's said it. The forest creaks in response, ancient wood shifting under invisible weight. Somewhere deep inside, something growls, a reminder that this isn't a safe world, only a kinder one because people like Hagrid keep it that way. Scholars still argue whether Hogwarts' protection charms extend into the forest itself. Some say Dumbledore embedded living enchantments into the trees, a theory that would explain why certain creatures never cross its border. Others believe it's Hagrid's constant presence, the rhythm of his lantern, his voice, his love for the beasts that keeps chaos at bay. As the light fades through the canopy, you begin to suspect the truth lies somewhere between. That night, as rain begins again, Hagrid sits on his porch carving something small and delicate from a chunk of oak. You lean closer and realize it's a tiny figurine, a giantess with kind eyes. "Can't quite remember her face," he admits quietly. The candle flickers beside him, and for a brief moment, the wooden carving seems to breathe. He tucks it away carefully in a box filled with odds and ends, a broken fang, a cracked eggshell, a feather that glows faintly in the dark. "Every bit tells a story," he he says, voice thick. Even the ones nobody's meant to hear. You wake to the smell of smoke and cinnamon drifting through the morning fog. Hagrid's hut glows with the golden warmth of a small fire, the kind that turns even a damp Scottish dawn into something close to comfort. Today, he's hammering a plank of wood into what looks suspiciously like a new chicken coop, though from the claw marks on the old one, it's clear the previous tenants didn't die of natural causes. Had a bit of trouble with the foxes, he mutters, though you suspect the fox in question had 8 legs and answered to Aragog Jr. He waves you over, beaming, and the floorboards groan as you step inside. Every corner of his hut tells a story. A jar of pickled doxy wings, a rusted kettle that hums faintly with leftover magic, and a dented cauldron that might once have been part of a dragon's hoard. Here, Hagrid isn't just a gamekeeper. He's the quiet curator of a world that doesn't fit anywhere else. After breakfast, porridge thick enough to stop a curse, you follow him down to the lake. The air bites at your cheeks, sharp and clean, and the castle looms above like a sleeping titan. Built this myself, Hagrid says, patting the side of his hut with something between pride and apology. Figured if I couldn't have a home in the castle, I'd make one close enough to hear her snoring. The spot he chose isn't random. The Black Lake sits between Hogwarts and the Forbidden Forest, between civilization and chaos. And that's exactly where Hagrid has always lived, in every sense. Historians might call it poetic irony. He just calls it good fish in distance. Yet if you listen closely, you can hear in his words a yearning that never quite went away, the desire to belong without having to change shape to fit. As you walk, Hagrid points to a cluster of rocks jutting out from the shore. That's where I found the Grindylow nest, he says proudly. Nasty little things. Tried to bite me toes off. Lovely swimmers, though you raise an eyebrow. He shrugs. You learn to see the good in things, or you spend your life hiding under the bed. That's the sort of quiet philosophy you only get from someone who's seen both sides of the wand. The lake ripples, and for a moment, you swear you see something vast moving beneath the surface. A long, sinuous shadow that might be the giant squid or something older. She's older in Hogwarts, that one, Hagrid murmurs, reading your thoughts. Some reckon she remembers when giants and wizards lived side by side. Others say she's what's left of the locked spirits the muggles still make postcards about. He grins. I like to think she just likes the peace. Scholars still debate whether the squid was ever magical in the strict sense or a natural creature that adapted to centuries of ambient enchantment. Hagrid doesn't bother debating. He just feeds her scraps and calls her sweetheart. Back at the hut, Fang flops beside your feet with a groan that sounds suspiciously human. Hagrid pours 2 mugs of something that smells like burnt honey and sets one before you. Butterbeer's cousin, he says proudly. Bit stronger. Don't tell the kids you sip and nearly cough, your lungs staging a rebellion. He laughs so hard the mugs rattle. The warmth seeps in anyway, melting the damp chill clinging to your clothes. You know, he says, stirring his drink with a spoon big enough to row a boat. I reckon folks forget what it's like to be small. Everything's easier when you fit through doors. It's a half joke, half truth, and it lingers between you like smoke. Later, as the day stretches thin, Hagrid leads you behind the hut to a small patch of garden, except it's less garden and more battlefield. Giant pumpkins the size of carriages crowd together like sleeping beasts. Hybrid breed, he explains. Bit of charm work, bit of compost. Don't tell Sprout, she'll have my hide for cheatin'. You run your hand along one, and it thrums faintly, alive in some quiet, vegetable way. Tried talking to one once, he admits. Didn't go well. You stifle a laugh, and he gives you a mock glare. Oh, laugh now, but wait till they start talking back. Somewhere deep inside, that joke is a truth about Hagrid. Everything he touches, he treats like it might be more alive than it seems. As dusk falls, a letter arrives, delivered not by owl but by an old tawny raven that lands on the fence and caws until Hagrid retrieves the note. His brow furrows as he reads. Dumbledore, he says simply, slipping the parchment into his coat. He doesn't elaborate, and you don't ask. but you catch a flicker of something in his eyes. An old loyalty, yes, but also a trace of fear. "Reckon I've got to go up to the castle tonight," he says, his voice softer now. "Just a bit of business. Nothing serious, yet the way he grips his lantern suggests otherwise." That night, the forest hums with strange sounds. Wings brushing leaves, claws scraping bark, voices too old for language. You stand by the window, watching Hagrid's lantern bob through the darkness as he disappears toward the castle gates. For a moment, the light flickers, swallowed by the mist. You realize you're holding your breath. When it reappears, faint and distant, you exhale. Somewhere beyond those gates, the headmaster and his giant-hearted friend are planning something the world won't hear about for years. A quiet act of trust that will change the course of everything that follows. The next morning, the forest feels alive in that whispering, expectant way it sometimes does after magic has passed through the night before. Dew hangs thick on every leaf, and the air hums faintly, as if remembering a spell it can't quite repeat. You find Hagrid sitting on a fallen log just beyond the tree line, a kettle perched precariously on a bed of glowing embers. He looks tired but content, like a man who's been up all night doing something important and dangerous. "Didn't sleep," he admits, pouring tea into a mug that looks like it used to be a cauldron. "Had to check on a few old friends. Centaur's been restless. Heard the werewolves howlin' early, too." He gestures for you to sit, and the forest seems to close around you like a curtain. The shadows shift. What looks like a boulder suddenly moves. It's a sleeping troll, its breath rising in slow clouds. "Don't worry," Hagrid says casually. He's friendly. "Long as you don't look like breakfast." The Forbidden Forest is more than trees and beasts. It's a kingdom of its own. You follow Hagrid deeper, the light thinning into shafts that catch motes of golden dust. "Most folk think of this place as dangerous," he says, "and they're right. But it's got its order too. You just have to know the rules." He tells you how he once brokered peace between rival centaur herds by offering them a barrel of mead and the chance to lecture him about Jupiter's retrograde motion. "Never met anyone love talking about stars so much," he chuckles. "Makes divination look like guesswork. Scholars still debate whether Centaur's astronomical predictions were grounded in actual cosmic sensitivity or a self-contained mythology passed down through song and calculation." Hagrid doesn't care about the theories. He just listens when they speak, nods when they ask him to leave, and never forgets a name. At a small clearing, you come across a nest the size of a wagon. Inside it are eggs, translucent, faintly pulsing, and far too large to belong to any bird. "Don't touch," Hagrid warns, though his voice carries more admiration than fear. "Acromantula brood, Aragog's grandkids. They keep themselves mostly. Good neighbors if you feed 'em right." You glance around uneasily. "They watch, you know," he adds, eyes twinkling. "Always watchin'. Makes a fellow feel looked after. There's a rumor, half folklore, half fact, that the spiders of the forest weave their webs in patterns that mirror the constellations overhead. Some magical naturalists believe they're trying to communicate with something. Perhaps their own ancient mother species. Perhaps the forest itself." Hagrid just shrugs. "I think they're just artistic," he says, tossing a handful of roasted chestnuts toward the treetops, where something large catches them mid-air. The soundscape shifts again as you walk. A dry rustle to your left, a low growl to your right. Somewhere nearby, a unicorn snorts, and for a heartbeat, the world feels pure. Hagrid removes his hat and bows his head slightly, a gesture of respect you mimic instinctively. "They're rare now," he says, his tone reverent. "Fewer every decade. Too many hunters, too much dark magic. Folk forget that beauty's the hardest thing to protect." His words linger like the echo of an old hymn. Unicorns have been a scholarly obsession for centuries, some insisting they're literal creatures of light, others arguing they're projections of enchantment, magical echoes left by the world's oldest spells. "Doesn't matter which," Hagrid says softly. "Both deserve peace." As you move further in, a chill settles. The forest here is older, twisted oaks and towering yews draped in moss so thick it muffles your footsteps. Hagrid slows, lantern raised. "This part remembers," he says quietly. "Battles, deaths, old promises." He kneels to touch a patch of soil darkened by age. "They buried a basilisk here once. Ministry covered it up, called it an incident. But it weren't evil, just scared. Same as the rest of us." You look around, expecting ghosts, but there are none, just the heavy, watchful silence of old magic that refuses to fade. At last, you reach a pool glimmering with faint silver light. "This is where I come when the world feels too loud," Hagrid murmurs. You sit beside him, watching ripples chase one another across the surface. Dumbledore used to say every forest's got its secret heart, said this one beats with Hogwarts itself. You nod, thinking of the headmaster and his web of unspoken mysteries. "He trusts ye," you say. Hagrid smiles, looking suddenly small despite his size. "Aye, more'n I deserve. But I reckon that's what real trust is, giving it before it's earned." As dusk drapes over the canopy, fireflies blink awake like scattered stars. The forest sighs, settling into its nocturnal rhythm. Somewhere far off, a centaur's bowstring twangs. You hear faint laughter, young, wild, echoing through the branches, and realize it's Hagrid's, deep and unguarded. For all its danger, this place has given him something no castle ever could: belonging. He glances at you as he gathers his lantern. "Come on then," he says softly. "Time to head back before the trees start whispering bedtime stories." And for once, you're not sure if he's joking. When winter descends on the castle grounds, it does so like a siege. Frost grips the stones, the lake turns to glass, and the forest breathes steam with every gust of wind. You find Hagrid trudging through the snowdrifts in a coat that could double as a tent, hauling what looks like a large iron crate wrapped in chains. "Don't ask," he says cheerfully, which of course means you ask immediately. He grins under his beard. "Might be a dragon, might be a teapot. Depends on how warm it gets." You stare, half amused, half alarmed, as he drags it toward his hut, muttering something about responsible hatching temperatures. This, it turns out, is the famous Dragon's Breath winter, the year Hagrid decided that the Ministry's restrictions on breeding fire breathers were suggestions, really. Inside the hut, the air crackles with warmth and chaos. Blankets cover the windows, and every pot, pan, and bucket seems to serve as part of some improvised incubator. You watch him carefully stoke the hearth, eyes glinting with the sort of reckless tenderness you only see in people who care too much. "Found the egg up north," he says softly, turning it with both hands. "Traders were gonna sell it for potion parts. Couldn't let that happen, could I?" The egg shimmers faintly, scales pulsing like embers under skin. "Norwegian Ridgeback, if I'm guessing right. Proper temper on 'em, but beautiful, aye?" It's the kind of sentence that makes you realize Hagrid doesn't see danger the way others do. He sees potential. That's what got him expelled, and it's what keeps him alive. Days blur into nights. Snow falls, melts, falls again. The hut becomes both sanctuary and furnace, the air thick with the smell of singed wood and wet fur. Fang refuses to come near the egg, preferring the safety of the bed, though he still sneaks glances with the wary fascination of someone watching a thunderstorm from too close. "We'll call her Norberta," Hagrid says one night, holding the egg up to the fire. "Seems polite to decide early." There's a tenderness in his voice that surprises you. He talks to the egg like a friend, tells it stories about the school, about the students who think he's just a bumbling caretaker. "They don't mean harm," he adds quickly. "They just don't see the same way." He pauses. "Guess that's true for most people." When the egg finally cracks, weeks later, it happens quietly. No burst of fire, no explosion of magic. Just a faint hiss, a wisp of smoke, and a tiny claw emerging from the shell. Hagrid's face lights up like sunrise. "Look at ya," he breathes. The hatchling blinks, coughs a puff of soot, and sneezes a spark that sets Hagrid's beard smoking. You can't help laughing. and neither can he. First breath, and already trouble. He chuckles proudly. For a few brief days, everything feels right. The hut alive with heat, the forest calm, even the castle distant and approving. But of course, joy never stays long in stories like this. By the third week, Norberta's flames are too strong, her wings too quick. The hut reeks of scorched curtains and bravery. Dumbledore visits in the middle of the night, speaking softly on the doorstep while Hagrid stands there, shoulders slumped. You can't hear the words, only the tone, gentle, firm, final. When he returns, he doesn't say much. "She'll be all right," he murmurs, eyes glistening. "Charlie'll take her. Knows how to handle dragons." He watches the sky for hours after the crate is lifted away by broom and rope. Somewhere high above, Norberta roars one last time before disappearing into the clouds. There's an odd quiet after that. The fire burns lower, the forest sounds duller. "That's the thing about love," Hagrid says at last, voice rough. "Doesn't matter if you're a wizard or a dragon, it still burns, don't it?" You nod because there's nothing else to do. He smiles faintly and pours 2 mugs of tea, the steam curling up like smoke from an old memory. Outside, snow begins again, gentle this time, each flake catching the lantern light like falling ash. You think about how history books never mention this winter, how no one wrote down the nights Hagrid nearly froze because he refused to leave a dragon egg alone. But the forest remembers. The forest always remembers. The snow has barely melted when Hagrid receives another parchment sealed with the phoenix red wax of the headmaster. You recognize the script even from a distance, elegant, looping, and slightly impatient, like someone who never fully stopped writing spells. "Ah, here we go again," Hagrid mutters, breaking the seal. "Another errand for Dumbledore. Reckon it's time to stretch me legs." He doesn't elaborate, but the excitement in his voice tells you it's more than a stroll through the woods. Dumbledore's quiet missions, as they're later called in order records, were rarely quiet and never simple. That evening, you find Hagrid packing his enormous coat pockets with items that make no logical sense together. Sausages, a compass shaped like a frog, a coiled rope, and what appears to be a petrified hamster. "Don't ask," he says, which by now you know means definitely ask later. The trek begins at dawn. Mist clings low over the hills, and the castle vanishes behind you like a fading dream. Hagrid's strides are long and steady, his lantern swinging rhythmically as he hums an old tune, something he claims is a lullaby from the giant clans of the north, though historians still debate whether giants ever sang anything that wasn't about war or weather. "My dad used to say songs make even mountains listen," he tells you with a smile. "Never did try singing at one myself. Might wake the poor thing up." You follow him for hours through bogs and bracken until you reach what looks like the ruins of a chapel, half swallowed by earth. The air hums faintly, like a chord just out of tune. "There it is," Hagrid whispers, "one of the old sites." You step inside, and the temperature drops instantly. The floor is made of black stone, etched with runes that shimmer when touched by lantern light. Dumbledore says these places were built before Hogwarts, Hagrid explains. Back when magic was more wild, less tidy. Wizards these days like everything in straight lines. He kneels beside a collapsed altar and brushes away dust to reveal a faintly glowing emblem, a serpent curled around a key. Could be Slytherin's mark, he muses, or maybe just some old family crest. Nobody agrees. Scholars have argued for centuries about whether early wizarding founders were unified or competing bloodlines, and this ruin, tucked deep in the highlands, remains one of the least understood. Hagrid doesn't seem to care about theories. He's here for something else. From his coat, he produces a heavy cloth bundle tied with dragon's sinew. Inside lies a stone sphere, faintly pulsing with blue light. "Lost relic," he says quietly. "Ministry don't know about it. Dumbledore reckons it's safer this way." You can feel the warmth radiating from it, alive, almost breathing. "Said to belong to the druids that tamed the first Thestrals," Hagrid continues. They used it to guide the dead through storms. He looks at it the way most people look at portraits of loved ones. Funny, innit? Whole world's full of magic, and still we forget what it's for. On the way back, a storm catches you halfway across the moor. Wind howls, snow lashes sideways, and lightning claws the horizon. Hagrid shields you with one arm, his coat flaring like a sail. "Keep close," he shouts, his voice half lost in the wind. You glimpse the sphere glowing through the fabric, pulsing in rhythm with his heartbeat. For a moment, you think you see shapes moving inside the storm, figures flickering like memories, faces of people long gone. When it's over, you both stand in silence, soaked and trembling. "It happens sometimes," Hagrid murmurs. "Magic remembers its makers." It's a strange thought, but it sticks with you. Maybe the past isn't something behind us, but something waiting to be noticed again. When you finally return to the hut, the relic is gone, taken by Dumbledore's agents, no doubt. But the blue glow lingers faintly in the corners, like the last breath of a candle. "Can't tell anyone, of course," Hagrid says, drying his beard by the fire. "Ministries say I'm meddling. Maybe I am. But if you don't keep the old magic alive, it dies quiet. And I can't stand quiet." You nod, understanding more than you expected. There's a kind of unspoken law in this world. Those who guard its wild things also guard its forgotten truths. Outside, the sky clears and stars spill across the black like scattered glass. "Funny thing," Hagrid says as he sips from his chipped mug. "The world's full of wizards who know spells but not wonder." He smiles faintly, eyes reflecting firelight and starlight all at once. "Dumbledore says wonder's the last kind of magic that can't be taught. Reckon he's right." A week passes before Hagrid lets you into his hut again. This time, the door opens, not to the smell of stew or smoke, but to the scent of damp parchment and dust. Every inch of space is filled. Shelves bowed under the weight of strange relics, cabinets stuffed with trinkets, jars, and half-broken instruments. You realize with a small gasp that you're standing in something between a museum and a mausoleum. "Keeper o' keys, aye," Hagrid says, noticing your expression. "But keeper o' other things too." He gestures toward a table stacked with peculiar objects. A silver mirror cracked in a lightning pattern, a wand with no core, and a jar containing a faintly glowing feather that hums when the wind shifts. "Not everything's meant for Gringotts," he mutters. "Some things need caring for, not counting." He picks up a small wooden box bound in leather straps and opens it with surprising gentleness. Inside lies a tarnished ring set with a stone the color of smoke. "Found this near an old battlefield in Wales," he says softly. "Could be cursed, could be just lonely. Either way, it's got a story, and I'm not one to throw stories away." You ask why he keeps them. Surely some of these are dangerous, but he just shrugs. Danger's just another way of saying worth remembering. It's the kind of answer that sounds simple until you sit with it. Over the years, Hogwarts official records mention nothing of this side of Hagrid's life. The Ministry's historians dismissed him as an unsanctioned collector. Others called him a sentimental fool. But among the few who really knew him, Dumbledore, McGonagall, even the ghosts, there was a quiet understanding. Hagrid wasn't hoarding objects, he was preserving memory. "Every bit of magic comes with a bit of pain," he explains, running a massive finger along the edge of a cracked shield. "This one came from a knight who tried fighting a banshee with bravery instead of brains. Didn't end well. But his shield still sings when there's thunder. You listen and swear you hear a faint hum. The hut's light flickers as dusk thickens outside. A storm rolls over the hills, shaking the glass. "Best time for remembering," Hagrid says, reaching for another artifact. It's a small, rusty key that doesn't seem remarkable until he holds it near the lantern. Its shadow forms a different shape, a doorway. "No one knows what it opens," he says, eyes soft with curiosity. "Found it in the lake silt 30 years ago. Reckon the door's still waiting somewhere." You imagine it. hidden beneath Hogwarts or behind one of the castle's many portraits. A door meant for someone who's forgotten they can open it. Scholars of magical architecture once wrote about wandless locks that respond to emotion rather than incantation, but none have been confirmed. Hagrid, of course, doesn't care whether the Ministry confirms it. If it's true, he says, then it's true enough for me. He pulls a tattered notebook from the shelf and flips through pages filled with ink blots and sketches of beasts. In the margins are notes, small, careful handwriting utterly unlike his. That's Dumbledore's, he admits. Used to leave me little notes after I brought something back. Said I had a knack for finding what shouldn't be found. He chuckles, then grows quiet. Sometimes I wonder if he sent me looking for things just so I'd stay out of trouble. Other times I think he knew exactly what I needed to feel useful. Thunder cracks, shaking the walls. Fang whines and hides under the table. The feather in the jar pulses with blue light, casting shadows that look almost alive. Some nights, Hagrid says softly, I reckon these things keep me company more than people do. They don't judge, don't gossip, just remember. He leans back, the chair creaking under his weight, and gazes around the room. Funny, innit? You start collecting things because you think they need saving, and one day you realize it's you who needed it all along. Outside, rain lashes the windows. The forest hums with nocturnal life, hooves in the mud, wings against bark, voices whispering names only trees remember. Hagrid stands, stretches, and opens the window just a crack, letting in the cold air. There, he says, inhaling deeply. Nothing like the smell of rain on wood. Reminds me I'm still part of it all. For a moment, you see what he means. The line between man and nature, wizard and beast, memory and myth, blurring until it all feels like one story told in different tongues. He closes the window, smiles faintly, and hands you the cracked shield. Keep it for the night, he says. Might help you sleep better, or sing ye awake if the thunder gets lonely. You laugh, but when the next bolt splits the sky, you swear the shield hums back. That night, you wake to the sound of rain on the roof and realize Hagrid isn't in his bed. The hearth has burned down to a red glow, casting slow-moving shadows across the hut. You step outside, and there he is, sitting on a stump, a lantern balanced beside him, the broken remains of a wand laid carefully across his palm. The rain doesn't seem to bother him. It falls through his hair, glinting in the lantern light like strands of silver thread. Couldn't sleep, he mutters when he notices you. Storms make the memories louder. He turns the splintered wand slowly, reverently, and even in its ruined state, you feel something humming through the air, a faint vibration, like a heartbeat you can't quite hear. Used to be mine, he says softly, before they snapped it. You've heard the story before, the official one at least. Hagrid expelled for opening the Chamber of Secrets, wand confiscated and destroyed. But here, with the rain whispering through the grass and that small glow pulsing in his hand, the story feels different. Didn't break all the way though, he says, smiling faintly. Bit of the core still breathing. Dumbledore helped me hide it inside me umbrella. Pink one, you've seen it. Makes people laugh, which is the point. They laugh. They stop asking questions. He chuckles, but it's a quiet, aching kind of sound. Every time I light a fire or fix a hinge with this thing, I think about how close I came to never touching magic again. You sit beside him, the air heavy with the scent of wet earth and nostalgia. Sometimes I think the wand remembers me more than I remember it, he admits. Maybe that's the way of all broken things. They keep a bit of what they were, hoping you'll come back. He holds it toward the fire, and for a heartbeat, the broken tip flares faintly gold. Scholars have long debated whether a destroyed wand can still channel magic. Some say the bond between wizard and wood is unbreakable. Others dismiss it as superstition. But in that moment, you know the truth isn't written in any ministry report. The wand still knows him, and it still loves him back. The conversation drifts like the rain. He tells you about the day it happened, the expulsion, the whispers, the way the other students looked away. Didn't hate him, he says, shaking his head. They were scared. Hogwarts don't teach you what to do when the world decides you're the monster. He stares into the forest, eyes reflecting the faint blue of the lantern flame. I kept thinking, if I'm half giant, maybe I'm supposed to be what they think I am. Took me years to stop trying to prove I weren't. His voice cracks, then steadies. Funny thing is, once you stop proving, you start living. A light wind stirs, carrying the smell of pine and something faintly metallic. You realize it's coming from the umbrella propped beside him, the hidden wand humming faintly inside. Sometimes she acts up, Hagrid says. Last winter she turned me Stu into a hedgehog. Cute little bugger though. Named him Stewie. You both laugh until the rain drowns the sound. Humor has always been Hagrid's shield, the one thing that keeps the heaviness from sinking too deep. When the storm eases, you notice something carved into the stump where he's sitting. A small inscription, half hidden by moss. It reads, "For those who stayed when the gates closed." He catches your glance and shrugs. Just something I wrote a while back. For Dumbledore. For me. For anyone who's ever been told they don't belong. The forest seems to exhale at those words, as if acknowledging a truth it's known all along. A soft hoot echoes from above, and an enormous owl swoops down, landing near the hut. It drops a small parcel wrapped in wax paper. Hagrid unties it, revealing a small vial of silvery liquid and a folded note. From Dumbledore, he says. Pensive memory. Says it's not to be stored at the castle. He places it carefully on a shelf beside the relics you saw earlier. Reckon it's safer here. The Ministry never looks in a hut that smells like wet dog. He grins, but his eyes linger on the vial. Sometimes I think Dumbledore keeps too many secrets for one man. Then I look round and realize I've been doing the same. As the sky begins to pale, he tucks the broken wand back into his coat, pats the stump, and rises. Come on, he says quietly. Tea's on. You follow him back into the hut, where the fire comes back to life with one soft tap of that hidden pink umbrella. A spark catches, dances, and grows. Small magic, humble but alive. He watches it for a long moment before murmuring, "See that? Still works. Guess I do too." And for the first time since you met him, you realize that this man, half giant, half outcast, all heart, never needed a whole wand to make the world burn brighter. You wake the next day to the sound of a low, distant rumble. Not thunder this time, but something slower, heavier, deliberate. It's the castle bells. You glance out the window and see that Hagrid is already up, pacing near the edge of the forest, a folded parchment clutched in his hand. The air feels strange, electric, with tension. Got a message, he says when you join him. His voice is low but steady. Dumbledore needs me tonight. Big job, quiet one. He doesn't meet your eyes. You know better than to pry. Whatever this task is, it sits in his chest like a weight too heavy to set down. Later, historians will write about that night as the turning of an age, though none of them will mention the man who carried it out. The day passes in a kind of trance. Hagrid busies himself with chores, mending fences, feeding the thestrals, chopping wood so violently you can feel the vibrations through the ground. Every now and then, he stops to stare at the sky, lips moving in what might be prayer or memory. When dusk arrives, he sets his tools down and changes into his thick traveling coat. Best keep your distance from the forest tonight, he tells you. Wind's turning strange. There's something in his tone, half warning, half farewell. What's in the letter? You ask softly. He hesitates, then says, not what. He folds the parchment back into his pocket, checks the lantern, and starts toward the gate. You follow him as far as the bridge. The moon is rising behind the castle, pale and enormous, painting the snow in silver. Hagrid's breath clouds in the cold as he adjusts the lantern strap over his shoulder. Funny, ain't it? He says. Spend half your life trying to prove you can be trusted, and one day the greatest wizard alive looks ye in the eye and says he's got something only you can do. You nod, though your throat feels tight. You'll be careful, you manage. He grins. Always am. Just don't tell the centaurs that. He disappears into the fog, and for a long time, You see nothing but the faint, bobbing light of his lantern winding down the path toward the forbidden forest. Then the light stops. You wait, counting breaths, until it moves again, slower this time, as though burdened. The night swells with a cold wind that carries faint sounds, a motor rumbling, an infant's cry, the soft hoot of an owl. Something monumental is unfolding beyond your sight, something that will echo through history in whispers and lullabies. When Hagrid finally returns hours later, dawn is a pale bruise on the horizon. His beard is dusted with frost, his eyes red but alive. "It's done," he says simply. Safe and sound he is, right where he needs to be. He doesn't say the boy's name, but you already know. The boy who lived, the orphan who would one day walk these grounds again and call Hagrid his first friend. But in this moment, there's no legend, no prophecy, just a tired half-giant who carried a baby through the night and handed him to a world that would never quite understand either of them. "Dumbledore said I did good," he murmurs, sinking into his chair by the fire. "Said it'd be the start of something." He chuckles softly. "Feels more like the end of something to me." Outside, the first rays of sun catch the frost on the window pane, scattering light across the cluttered room. It glints off relics, bottles, feathers, every scrap of magic that Hagrid has ever saved. The forest hums faintly in the distance, a low sound like the world exhaling. "Reckon I'll have to tidy up," he says after a while, though you both know he won't. Can't have the place looking like this when the term starts. He leans back, mug in hand, the weight of the night finally settling into his bones. "Strange thing," he says quietly. "You can go years without matterin' much, and then one night, everything depends on ye not droppin' what's in your arms." He closes his eyes for a moment, the fire painting his face in amber light. "He looks so small," he whispers, "didn't even cry at the cold, just stared up at me like he knew I weren't a monster after all." He lets out a long, shaky sigh. "Guess I just had to wait for someone who'd see me the way Dumbledore did." The kettle whistles softly and he chuckles through the exhaustion. "Tea fixes everything, eh?" You pour 2 mugs, and as he takes his, the faintest smile returns. "Sleep'll have to wait," he mutters, eyes half closed. "Got work to do. World don't stop just 'cause something big happened." He gestures toward the window where the first students are already arriving, their laughter floating faintly across the grounds. Tomorrow, they'll all wake up thinking nothing's changed. And that's how it's supposed to be. He finishes his tea, sets the mug down, and gazes out at the forest one last time. "Funny," he says softly. "Every great story starts quiet, like a lantern in fog. Years later, the hut looks smaller than you remember. Not physically, it's still built like a fortress, stitched together by mud, timber, and stubbornness, but smaller in the way places seem when time has wrung the noise out of them. The pumpkins out back have grown wild, their vines curling across the fence like green snakes. Fang, gray around the muzzle now, sleeps by the door, twitching occasionally in dreams of chase and thunder. Hagrid sits in his old chair by the fire, the one that creaks in familiar protest, polishing a kettle that doesn't need it. He doesn't hum anymore. He just listens to the forest's whispers, to the wind scraping its old stories across the window pane. "Can't believe how quiet it gets when everyone's gone," he says softly. "Even the castle's got a different heartbeat now." His eyes linger on a cracked photo frame on the mantel. Students, friends, a certain bespectacled boy grinning with a baby dragon perched on his shoulder. The photo moves, of course, but the joy inside it feels frozen in a time that's gone. He rises slowly, his joints groaning like the castle doors, and steps outside. The moon hangs low and fat over the lake, turning the surface into a field of glass. "Still can't get used to her being gone," he murmurs, meaning Dumbledore, you think. The reflection of the stars shivers with each ripple, and for a moment, you could swear the lake blinks back. "Used to come down here, you know, just to listen. Said the lake remembers every secret ever told near it. Reckon that's why it's so deep." He chuckles quietly, a sound that warms the night for an instant before the cold swallows it again. Then, after a long pause, "Funny thing, Dumbledore always said I'd outlive most of the staff. Didn't think he meant it." Inside the hut, the relics are still there, though dulled with age. The feather in the jar has lost its glow. The broken shield hums only when thunder passes far off. But there's a new addition, an old wand case resting on the table. "It's his," Hagrid says when you ask. "Left it to me in his will. Said I'd know what to do with it when the time came. He doesn't elaborate, and you don't press him. Some mysteries you've learned stay whole only when left untouched." He sits down again, pours tea, and adds a splash of something stronger from a flask marked "for medicinal purposes, mostly." "You'd be surprised," he says, grinning, "how many problems can be fixed with tea and good company. Shame there's less of both these days." Outside, an owl hoots, and the trees answer with the sigh of moving branches. "Centaurs still come by sometimes," Hagrid says. "Bring news, or just argue about Jupiter again. Spiders keep to themselves now. Aragog's gone, bless him. Unicorns still wander the glades. Always thought they'd stop, once the war's ended. But maybe the world needs a bit of magic that doesn't ask for anything back." He stares into the fire, eyes reflecting amber. "Guess that's what